This 9:30 p.m. reading on a Thursday night. You deserve that. And here's the beginning of a story called Bor Urus, which is in my new collection, or my newest collection, Sefira and Other Betrayals. I love a big storm. I love the build-up to it. The meteorologists, flushed with their sudden importance, narrating the flow of the oranges and reds across the local maps. The supermarkets, crowded with people whose furrowed brows and pursed lips grant the soup cans and bottled water in their carts a promotion to provisions. The neighbors diligently preparing their houses and yards for the high winds by rolling trash cans into the garage, securing the shutters as best they can. I love the storm itself. The house creaking as the wind moans against it, the rain rattling on the windows, reducing the art to an impressionistic blur, the lightning burning the air white, the thunder shaking the walls. And I love the aftermath, the cautious step onto the front porch to survey the trees, their branches still saturated, bent, the walk around the house to pick up any items that were blown loose, the drive to town to observe the storm's more general ruin. It's the emotions that accompany each stage of the storm. I savor them. On one side, there's anticipation, a half-pleasurable dread at what's bearing down on us that makes the air hum, the way it does before any big event. On the other side, there's relief, which may also be tinged with dread at whatever damage awaits discovery, whatever crash must be sourced and reckoned with, but which is more an emptied-out feeling, as if for a moment we're as clear as the air the storm has just washed. In between dread and relief, though, is the most rarefied sensation, a terror at our utter powerlessness in the face of what's enveloped us, a panic at the trees whipping side to side deliriously, the power lines bouncing like jump ropes, the wine glasses ringing at each clap of thunder, which borders the ecstatic. When a storm is at its peak and the world outside seems on the verge of tearing itself apart, a kind of radical openness comes briefly into view, as if, with each blanching of the view out of the front window, something else, a more essential state of existence, draws that much closer to being unveiled. At some point, I began to suspect that my figurative response to the violence of a severe storm might be pointing me in the direction of actual truth. I was a teenager, 15, 16, that point of maximum narcissism, when it seems entirely reasonable to think that you are privy to special insight, able to intuit secret knowledge. However, unlike so many of the other notions that occupied my brain at that time, which steadily decamped as my teens drained into my 20s, this one dug in more firmly. It was buttressed by bits and pieces of magazine articles read in waiting rooms, by fragments of documentaries stumbled upon while late-night channel surfing. The details were fairly incoherent, but the gist of the theory I assembled was, if there are other dimensions, parallel universes, alternate planes of existence, call them what you will, then mightn't the tremendous release of energy in a serious storm unsettle, destabilize things sufficiently for that other place to be glimpsed, even entered? Anyone with a modicum of scientific knowledge, let alone actual expertise, on whom I tried out this line of reasoning, treated it with a species of amused tolerance, much the way they probably would of a declaration of belief in alien visitation. This lack of support did nothing to unseat my conviction. In fact, it was during my 20s that I first ventured out into the midst of a storm to see what I could see. Of course, this was nothing, which I blamed on the fact that I sat in my car the entire time, listening to the rain bang on the roof. It did not stop me from repeating the experiment with subsequent storms. Soon I was starting the car, switching on the headlights, flipping on the wipers, and pulling out of the driveway in search of revelation. For the next 16 years, it eluded me. About the closest I came was during a storm that came over while I was driving back from a trip up into the Catskills with my then fiancée. All afternoon, tall heaps of cloud had loomed over the mountains, dimming the sky, then moving east. When the air thickened, however, humidity pressing on us like a great damp hand, a storm seemed in the offing, and we agreed it would be best if we beat it back to our apartment. Just the other side of Woodstock, a handful of fat drops of rain burst on the windshield, and then the world outside was swept away by a wall of water. Afraid to break into a hydroplane, I downshifted as quickly as I could, stabbing the button for the hazards. Engine whining, the car slowed to a crawl, but even on fast, the wipers did little more than push the water screening the windshield back and forth. Lightning flashed, turning the rain into white neon, and the thunder that followed 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi shook the car. I was already steering for the shoulder when the lightning repeated, the thunder answering 1 Mississippi faster. Prin was telling me to pull over, the command a litany, pull over, pull over, pull over, pull over, pull over. I'm trying, I said, as lightning and thunder split the air together. Although I couldn't help my flinch, I wasn't worried as much about being electrocuted as I was about someone racing up behind and slamming into us. I knew the road wasn't that wide, the shoulder not that far away, but hours seemed to pass as the car eased to the right, lightning flaring like the flash of an overeager photographer, thunder overlapping, crashing into itself, and forming an avalanche of sound that rumbled and roared over us. When I judged we had crossed onto the shoulder, I put the clutch in, shifted into neutral, and opened my door. I hadn't unbuckled my seatbelt, so I couldn't lean that far out of the car, and Prin didn't have to reach that far to grab my arm and haul me back inside. "Are you insane?" she screamed. "Close the door." I did. "What were you thinking?" she continued, her eyes wide with terror. "There's a goddamn hurricane out there." "I was checking to make sure we were on the shoulder," I said, which was true. I was looking for the white strip that delineated the edge of the road. But once I'd pushed the door open and the immensity of the storm had rushed over me, I was swept by a feeling of such exultation that the hand Prin had caught was stealing toward the release for my seatbelt. At her expression of utter fright, however, my exhilaration curdled to embarrassment. I took her hands and said, "It's okay, asshole." She tugged her hands from mine. "Yeah, but I'm your asshole." That brought a smile to her face, which disappeared as lightning stabbed the trees to our right, thunder cracking so loud it deafened us. Prin pressed herself into her seat as if it could conceal her, her hand groping for mine. Sheets of rain layered the windows. I switched the wipers off. "It can't last much longer," I said, speaking too loudly because of the ringing in my ears. "These summer storms blow themselves out pretty quickly." Prin didn't answer. I stared out the windshield, trying to distinguish the road through the water. For a moment the rain lessened and the world in front of us swam into view. Maybe 50 yards ahead, the road rose in a slight incline, more an extended bump than a hill. On the other side of that rise, something was crossing the road from left to right. It was an animal, easily as big as an elephant. I briefly thought it was an elephant, had visions of an accident involving a convoy of circus animals. But the silhouette was wrong. The back was longer, the dip to the hips less pronounced. The head shorter, blunter, crowned by a pair of heavy horns as wide as my car was long. With each step it took, the animal's head swung from one side to the other with a slowness that was almost casual, as if it were out for a stroll in a light mist, not a raging storm. My hand was back on the door handle, and then the rain picked up again, hiding the enormous profile behind a curtain of water. I opened my mouth to say what I didn't know. I was waiting for the rain to ebb once more, allow another glance at whatever that had been. When it did not, I turned to Prin and said, "Did you see that?" "What?" she said. Her brow was level, her mouth straight, her cheeks pale. She was angry, I realized. She had witnessed what I had, and the experience had made her furious. "Do you think you can drive out of here?" I wanted to ask her if she was serious, remind her that this was a car, not a submarine. But what I said was, "Yeah." Wipers whipping back and forth, defogger blowing, hazards blinking. I put the car into gear and turned toward the road. I was certain that I was going to drive into whatever had been crossing it. After 5 minutes passed with no collision, though, my hands began to relax their hold on the steering wheel, and once the dashboard clock had counted another 5 minutes, I knew that, even crawling forward as we were, we had passed beyond the place the great animal had been. I felt not relieved so much as full, as if what I had seen were inside me, straining against the walls of my chest. I couldn't seem to draw enough breath. The sensation persisted all the long drive back to our apartment in Wiltwyck, where Prin led me directly into the bedroom, tugged down her shorts and mine, and pulled me onto the bed. We made quick, vigorous love, and once we were done, did so a second and a third time. When, aching, sore, we finally pulled apart from each other, we stood from the bed and stumbled into the kitchen and out the back door, onto the apartment's nominal back deck. Night had descended, bringing with it a fresh round of storms. Naked, we stood in the darkness, letting the rain pound down onto us. The pressure in my chest had eased, though it was not gone. It was more as if whatever was inside me had folded its legs and settled into sleep. If I say that the babies, twins, who resulted from that afternoon occupied my attention for the next dozen years, there's enough truth to the words for them not to feel like too much of an evasion. What they are is incomplete. After all, there were a good 4 weeks between Prinz and my lovemaking and the baby blue plus appearing in the window of the home pregnancy test, during which time 3 more storms thundered through the area. I could have ventured out into any of them, could have tried to return to the spot outside Woodstock where my long-term intuition had seemed to flower into reality. For that matter, once Prinz's pregnancy was confirmed, our hasty marriage accomplished, there were a handful of instances before the twins arrived when I could have resumed my investigation, as there were scattered throughout the years that followed. The most I did, however, was a cursory search of the web, which revealed that the place where Prin and I had seen whatever we'd seen was proximate to Dutchman's Creek, which had a vaguely sinister reputation. Why exactly, I couldn't discover. On a couple of occasions, I broached the topic of that day with Prin, but she met my question of what she thought we'd seen crossing the road with one of her own. What? What is it you think we saw? Strictly speaking, it wasn't a denial of our experience, but it was as if shutters dropped over her eyes, sealing off what might have been happening behind them. It stymied me into silence, which appeared to be the desired effect since Prin did not continue the conversation. It was as if the part of me that responded to storms so profoundly had become stuck, the memory of that huge form a gouge in the vinyl, stuttering my emotions. I would sit on the living room couch, Nina cradled in my right arm, Eddie in my left, as the rain washed the picture window, and the curiously hollow ring of water-striking glass would absorb my attention, leaving it too saturated for any further response to the tumult outside. I would half lie on Eddie's bed, my head and shoulders propped against his headboard, his face pressed into my chest, his arms wrapped around me with all his 5-year-old strength as the air lit white and crackled, and I would stroke his hair, rub his back through his Spider-Man pajamas, telling him as I did so that it was just the weather, keeping my voice calm, level, the steady rise and fall of my words, the slow circles my hand traced on his cotton top, smoothing away any emotions of my own that might have been threatening to bunch up. I would sit on the living room couch beside Nina as the CBS affiliate out of Albany interrupted our sitcom to discuss the severe weather rampaging across the area. And after leaving my seat to point out to her where Ulster County was on the regional map, I would explain why I didn't think we had to worry about a tornado striking us, although there was one that had knocked down the wall of a school south of us in Newburgh some years ago, which led to us abandoning the TV to search online for accounts of that old catastrophe, channeling any impulses that had been stirred by the wind shriek into research. The agitation, the exhilaration I had felt wasn't gone. It wasn't that far away at all. It was contained, dormant. What raised it was my children, specifically their decision to venture out into the woods behind our house on the brink of a storm. I saw the heavy clouds piling overhead. I had read the weather report, which put the entire region under a severe thunderstorm watch. I could already hear the distant thunder like big trucks bumping over a road. Nonetheless, when Eddie said that he and Nina were going outside to try his new 2-way radios, I didn't object. "Don't go too far," I called after him. "It's supposed to rain." But my only answer was the screen door to the porch slamming on its frame. The thunder arrived first, a series of deep growls that rolled over the low hill behind the house. For long moments, the air was crowded with sound, and then it was full of rain, the lightning that flickered almost an afterthought. I sat on the living room couch, the book I had been reading lowered, and listened for the clump of my children's sneakers on the porch steps, their inevitable giggles at having run home through the downpour. Lightning flashed, the thunder's growl rose to a roar. I left my book open on the couch and hurried to the back door. Rain hammered the porch. I opened the screen door, and the wind caught it and flung it wide. Leaning out into the storm, I cupped my hands around my mouth and called Nina and Eddie's names. There was no answer. I could picture the two of them crouched beside a tree, grinning like maniacs as they listened to me shouting, an image sufficiently annoying for me to consider leaving them to their sodden fate, an impulse that vanished a moment later when a bolt of lightning speared the top of the back hill. Thunder boomed, shuddering the house, the rain redoubled. Before I fully knew what I was doing, I was down the porch stairs and running across the yard toward the woods, my bare feet kicking up sprays of cold water. By the time I reached the tree line, I was soaked, my hair and clothes plastered to me, my eyes full of rain. Bellowing my children's names, I plunged amongst the trees. Lightning whited the air, thunder shook the tree trunks. Every warning about what to do in a thunderstorm, especially the keeping away from trees part, ran through my head. "Nina!" I shouted. "Eddie!" I dragged my forearm across my eyes, trying to wipe away water with water. dread coiled deep in my gut, while higher in my chest, a sensation of being absolutely overwhelmed threatened to force its way out of me in one long scream. Strange as it sounds, only after Nina and Eddie had caught my arms and were guiding me toward the house did I realize that the tree I had been standing near had been struck by lightning. When the storm had burst, the twins had sought shelter in the garage, where they'd remained until they'd heard me calling for them. They'd emerged in time to watch me rush into the woods. After a brief deliberation, they'd set off after me. 50 feet into the woods they stopped, unable to tell which direction I'd gone. Nina was for splitting up and going left and right. Eddie favored staying together and moving forward. Their debate meant that they saw the lightning plunge into the trees somewhere in front of them out of the corners of their eyes. The attendant burst of thunder doubled them over, their hands clapped to their heads. Ears stunned, they stumbled to the spot where a moderately sized tree had been detonated by the lightning bolt. Chunks of wood, some steaming, a few on fire, fanned out from the trunk's jagged remains. In the midst of the wreckage, the twins found me standing with my eyes wide. Later, Eddie would tell me that he was afraid to touch me because he was afraid that I might be electrified. No such worry disturbed his sister, who strode up to me, took my right arm, and turned me toward the house. The worst effects of my experience, the almost total blanching of my vision, the loss of my hearing, ebbed more quickly than I would have predicted. By the time Prin had returned from shopping and was driving me to the hospital, my vision had largely cleared, though color still appeared washed out, and while my hearing was little more than a high-pitched ringing, I was aware of my family's voices as disturbances in that noise. The ER doctor pronounced a cautious diagnosis that I was substantially unharmed, which my regular MD would second when I saw her the following day, and which she would amend to mild hearing loss when I checked in with her 2 weeks after that. I wasn't aware of any diminishment in my hearing, as much as I was in my vision, specifically my color vision, which remained less vibrant than it had been, as if I were viewing colors through a film. My ongoing complaints led to an appointment with my optometrist, who found nothing obviously wrong with my eyes and referred me to an ophthalmologist, a retinal specialist, who spent a long time shining painfully bright lights into my dilated pupils, only to arrive at the same verdict. The specialist offered to send me on to a subspecialist he knew up in Albany, but I demurred. By that time, I was starting to understand what had happened to me. 2 days before my appointment with the ophthalmologist, I dreamed I was back in the woods, searching for the twins in the midst of the storm. I stumbled into the small clearing where the twins had found me, evergreens interrupted by the occasional birch stationed its border. I screamed my children's names, and as I did so, a finger of lightning touched one of the trees across the clearing. For a dream moment, the lightning hung in place, a blazing seam in the air, a brilliant snarl of glass through which I glimpsed a shape. It was a tree, but such a tree as I'd never seen. Leaves as green as an emerald, as one of those tropical snakes you see in nature documentaries, gathered into a globe atop a slender trunk whose bark shone like polished bronze. Simultaneously, this was a child's approximation of a tree, and the original tree, the platonic ideal from which all others emanated. When the lightning was done plunging into the evergreen, the window it had burned into the air closed. A feeling of loss, of grief, as profound as what I felt at the death of my father made me suck in my breath as if I'd been kicked. Gasping, I struggled up to consciousness, to Prin asleep in the bed beside me. Thank you. So midsummer. Thank you all for coming. I understand the bar might be open.